The passion for healing is here, but the passion for political healing is also here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. There's been a lot of controversy in the past week since Rand Paul, I say, tepidly endorsed Mitt Romney for the Republican GOP nomination, etc. And there's been a storm of you-know-what going on. We've interviewed a bunch of people on this issue, and I can't think of someone better to round out our perspective here than senior campaign advisor to Ron Paul, Doug Wead. Doug Wead, welcome back to the Robert Scott Bell Show.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Now, you know, the animated epithets and passion and emotion and GMO tomatoes been thrown everywhere since this happened. I mean, people that love Ron Paul, very passionate about the non-compromising way in which he has carried himself through his years in Congress is unlike any other prior. And we've talked about you and I together. You've never seen anybody like it. And I think there are political realities, and you having served in other administrations at the presidential level, could relate some things that maybe a Rand Paul was going through and how Ron Paul was able to navigate all those years a little bit differently.
Well, yeah, but that's why I'm with Ron Paul, because he navigates it differently, and I admire him for standing strong.
Well, as we do here, and I know that you're not an advisor to Rand Paul, nor am I, although I've interviewed him. I'm sure you've met him over the years. What I was most impressed in the most recent time was his willingness to stand up in the Senate to say, hey, let's disarm the FDA. Let's allow the American people to know what dietary supplements are, what they can do. And my goodness, if they can prevent disease, so be it. The American people should be able to know that and operate on that kind of information. For me, that's a guy that's not falling far from the tree, so to speak, in terms of what his dad has always stood up for, health freedom, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rand Paul's been heroic in the U.S. Senate. And very impressive with the stands that he's taken. You have to understand, for those of us in the Ron Paul movement, it's kind of like there's a runaway train and it's headed towards the canyon and the bridge is out, and people are saying, Barack Obama's running this train 100 miles an hour. We need Mitt Romney. He'll run this train only 85 miles an hour.
Right. And
we're saying, who cares? We're going off a cliff, and we want somebody who will stop the train, and that's why I committed to Ron Paul, and why many in the movement committed to Ron Paul.
Yes. And I think that's.
So,
Doug, I think that's understandably why so many people were upset with Rand for giving an endorsement to Mitt Romney even before the convention, even though it looks like it may be inevitable. But yet we hear this week that there's a suit being filed in regard to the binding of delegates. Could be a violation of the Voters' Right Act. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff happening.
Interesting stuff. And the Romney campaign is challenging our duly elected delegates in Nevada. They're going to put up their own delegate slate just artificially, and you know what will happen. They'll get to the national convention, and if they have the most delegates at the national convention, which looks like they will, they'll just seat their delegation and totally flaunt the will of the people and the democratically elected delegates of Nevada. So that's the sort of thing. It's not new. That happens in politics. That's part of the ugliness of the two-party system. But, what can we do?
Sure. Some have speculated, Doug, and again, strategery, so to speak, in politics is an interesting discussion, that Rand may have done this to kind of off-put the Romney camp so that they wouldn't be as violently attacking the Ron Paul crowd. Then we also hear that Santorum is now come out and saying, hey, I don't want these Ron Paul people impacting the platform, which he likes just as it is, preemptive war, etc.
Huh. Yeah, you look back in history, and that's how they play the political game. That's how it's played. That's what the neocons do. When Barry Goldwater won the nomination, went down to defeat, he nevertheless took over the Republican Party. There was a transformation of the Republican Party, which is what is happening right now. It's only happened 3 times in my lifetime, once under Goldwater, once with the influx of the evangelical Christians in 1988, and now today with the influx of the constitutional Republicans. So that's what's happening. And you remember what Nixon did. He got in behind Barry Goldwater, even though Goldwater was going to lose, and he supported him and endorsed him and went all over the country promoting him and winning IOUs And 4 years later, 1968, he was elected president of the United States because the Goldwater people felt he had supported them in their hour of need, so they felt like they had to support him when he ran. And that's so the neocons have played that game for years. And that's how it's played. Doesn't make it sweet, though.
If we look at history and learn from history, which I hope we will do, because the problem is so many Americans seemingly aren't taught history except that there are a bunch of disparate facts with no connection to anything and therefore are easily manipulated. Because you just brought up some significant parts of the history of the Republican Party, how it's transformed a few times over the years. And we look at, in some ways, what we have all done to be part of the Ron Paul revolution, if we will. I mean, I know we don't want to throw it on one man any more than Ron would say it's all about me. He would say exactly the opposite. It's about the ideas, which it is. What would we say strategically of his son saying, well, maybe I can play nice with Romney? Would this be of some benefit for the constitutional conservatives to come in 4 years versus staying with your dad as long as possible in this case and, building the coalitions, even though they would be probably attacked even more viciously?
Well, part of the problem for us and for the Romney people is Ron Paul. There's nothing Romney can give him. Audit the Fed, you got to be kidding. 80% of America wants to audit the Fed. Asking Romney to audit the Fed is kind of like asking a 10-year-old kid to eat an ice cream cone for me. Romney will be lucky if Obama doesn't announce he's going to audit the Fed. 80% is a hard number to avoid when you're a politician. Sure. And, of course, they won't really audit the Fed. It'll be some watered-down, phony version of auditing the Fed. But I wouldn't be surprised if they use that language. So there's nothing really that the establishment can give Ron Paul and or that he wants. A speech before the RNC that they're going to bury and not in prime time. And when you've got the national media against you anyway, because they benefit from the advertising dollars that come from the Federal Reserve, from the big companies and the loans that come out of the Federal Reserve. And they benefit directly, some of them, or indirectly from holding companies, the money they get. They're not going to showcase anything Dr. Paul says anyway. So that what's tough for the Romney people is there's nothing we want, or I should say there's nothing they've got we want. We want it all.
Sure. Yeah.
That's tough for us, too, in bargaining. But Rand Paul's different. Rand Paul could be elected president. So I understand why the decision was made. Doesn't mean I have to like it.
Yeah, of course. And the thing is, Rand Paul endorsing, however tepidly or passionately, it doesn't sound passionate to me, is not going to change any of our perspectives. We're not going to go out and endorse an establishment Republican that is for, preemptive war and fiat money, etc. But it's got to be some level of calculation. He's a very intelligent man. He's shrewd in the decision he's making. Only time will tell if it's the right decision for whatever outcome he's looking for. But certainly, I'm more interested at this moment in time, what is he doing in the Senate to stop things like attack on freedom of speech, attack on the freedom of the people to move about this country, to stop let's say, the attacks on foreign countries without declarations of war, which would have stopped pretty much everything since the end of World War II from occurring.
Yeah. Well, who do you have in the U.S. Senate, if not Rand Paul? Who do you have there arguing for what we believe? And I have to say, I have to tell you a little story. The constitutional movement and the people who drive it are not as pure as they purport to be either. What took me so long to understanding all of this and figuring it all out is when I was a young man in my 20s, I wrote a book for Ronald Reagan. It was the only book out in the Reagan Revolution in 1980, and the only book on Reagan available for anybody to buy. Mm-hmm. And it was called Reagan in Pursuit of the Presidency, 1980. And after I wrote it, I had a very prominent person call me, lived out in Washington State, wanted to meet with me, so we met. And he said, I will pay you money to write books. And he handed me a conspiracy book And he said, I'd want this in the book. I'd want this in the book. And he brought up something. I said, well, that's not true. He said, so what? People will buy this stuff. And that was my introduction to conspiracy theorists. So that turned me off so long. It took me a long time to awaken to all of this, because I thought, wow, these guys are just trying to make money off of people and their fears. And so the point is, you can find bad people everywhere. You can find them in the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, and you can find them in the conspiracy movement.
Sure.
And I just had kind of turned a deaf ear to the whole thing all that time till I saw Ron Paul in the debates. And
Yes.
by the way, there's another point. If Ron Paul hadn't run for the GOP nomination, if he'd have stayed in the Libertarian Party, I'd have never seen him. But he ran in the national GOP debates. I saw him. Wow, the light bulbs went off. I started asking questions like a lot of other people. I went to the internet and I studied, and I changed.
Yes. Yes, and that is a very significant and important point, that there are power structures on the planet, and I don't know that we are so deluded to believe we can change every power structure on the planet, but Ron Paul made a decision that he was going to try and do his level best within it to do whatever he could. And, of course, he sparked liberty in so many millions of people, not only in this country but around the world, because of what he's done. And you're right. The decision to do it within an existing power structure that we perhaps do not care for because of the outright criminality, and we could see this on both the Republican and Democrat establishment. But the fact that he did that opened the eyes of people that would have never witnessed anything happening, for instance, at a libertarian convention or otherwise. Not to denigrate a libertarian. I mean, we love liberty here. But the point is, it should be well taken, including benefit of the doubt scenarios with Rand Paul. We could question genuinely, why would you endorse that man, Romney? At the same time, he's his own man. He's not asking, for permission, and we got to at least respect that. We may disagree with certain opinions, or certain decisions. But I'm thinking, step back, give us some time. We continue to work on our front, all the fronts that are necessary, not just one front, to restore liberty.
Yeah, we all got to do what we can, and I mean, everybody keeps comparing this cycle to the last cycle and how much better we did.
Yes.
There's a lot of things we didn't do that I'm disappointed in. One of my greatest disappointments was our failure to feminize the issues of liberty. I'm impressed to see the women that have come into the movement, but I still see more men than women. And
Doug, can you hold on a moment? This is a very important
I've heard people
topic.
theorize the monetary dimension to it is mathematical and less appealing to women who are more relationship oriented and have a different skill set than men have. And so, but we need to feminize those issues instead of talking about how much a war costs in terms of dollars and balancing the budget. I felt we needed to drive home the point that there's an increase of divorce, an increase of suicide, that children are being lost to these multiple wars, sending these troops back over and over, that 1% of the country has to fight for the rest of us.
Yes. Doug, stand by.
It's a tragic story.
Doug, I need to take a quick break here, but I want to pick up this on the other side just for a few minutes, because I think you brought up a very significant and important point I don't want to go over too quickly. So we'll be right back. Doug Wead, Senior Campaign Advisor to Ron Paul, letting loose on some very important things for all of us to hear. Doug, I appreciate you being here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Stand by, coming right back.
The Robert Scott Bell Show.
Doug Wead is our guest here. A few more minutes. Appreciate you so much, Doug. What you just ended on last segment was the issue of feminizing the message of liberty. Now, I've seen it significantly in, let's say, the food freedom issue. I've covered stories of, the attacks on raw milk farmers, cow farmers, dairy farmers, Amish farmers, and the moms most directly impacted on this are trying to feed their babies. I can't think of a more feminine, inspiring issue than food freedom, and Dr. Paul has been outspoken as anybody in modern history, in politics, on that. And I think that is something I would like to see trending more. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and I especially, my point was that it needs to be argued on what are normally men's issues, like war. I mean, the cost of war. So it's not just that that war costs money, but and we can't balance the budget. But it's that war is destroying the American family, that there are children that are lost here because the dads are going back and back and back, and the moms sometimes. And there's a spike in divorce, which is leading to high suicide rates. You got men that don't know their families anymore. They've been going back to war so many times, and it's really tragic. And this is a woman's issue as well as a man's issue.
Yeah, and it's the antithesis to some semblance of family-based, if you will, conservatism. Did you see recently that the rates or the numbers of deaths associated with our warfaring in the last decade now, the death rates are more due to suicide than injuries on the battlefield? More suicides of the troops.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I saw the spike in the numbers continues. I mean, the United States accounts for 43% of the world's military spending. We have 50,000 jets. Our nearest competitor is China with 5,000 jets. It's just totally ridiculous. It is. That's one of the things I was looking forward to Tampa, is the international media to come in and cover it. Of course, the media dependent on Barclays and all the big banks in Europe is going to be hostile to Ron Paul. But the rank and file media, his message resonates. He's the only American politician that makes sense around the world when they hear Ron Paul say America should mind its own business, and it resonates with people around the world who say, wow, there is an intelligent American. And I was hoping a lot of those international journalists would descend on Tampa and shame some of our own local journalists who are in the pocket of the elitists, and shame them into seeing how important this message is for the world.
Well, the new media, of which we are a part, is doing its level best to get that out there. And of course, the world is watching and, in fact, tuning into alternative sources. We've just got picked up by UK Health Radio, so we're heard throughout Europe as well every day. So it's very exciting that a new way to communicate this message. And, of course, Ron Paul's been at it for so long, and we're reflecting to our level best that passion, that integrity, to bring it out there. Now, as I said, you've been involved in politics for so many years in the mainstream establishment as well, and you've seen so much. That's why I appreciate what you're sharing with us today. Have you seen evidence of awakening from maybe others in your peer group over time, or are they still steely-eyed and shut down to this message?
No, look at David Stockman. Look at the people that have awakened. Of course, he saw the numbers. I didn't understand or see the numbers. My dad used to always say, there's three kinds of people: those who are good with numbers and those who aren't good with numbers. Yeah. But I got turned on by all of this by the war. I knew George W. Bush. I knew he was going to go to war against Saddam Hussein. I didn't believe that anybody should die for that, to take care of a family feud, and that was deeply troubling to me morally and upset me. And when I heard Dr. Paul talk about these things in the debate, that really resonated. I thought, wow, who is this guy? This is amazing. Someone speaking so honestly and truthfully. But Robert, we do everything we can to save the body, because presidents have learned that if they keep the kill rate down, the war can go on. It can go on indefinitely. And if there's a war, they're likely to be reelected. So they seize that body. It may not have any arms and legs, but they'll spend millions of dollars keeping that body alive. And, of course, the wife will divorce it, and you bring that body back home, and the only people to really love it will be the mom and dad, and the body grows old, and the mom and dad die, and that body's shifted off to some veterans hospital somewhere with cockroaches. And every 8 years, the Washington Post takes a tour and writes a scandalous article about how the veterans are being treated. The point is, No Man Left Behind is all about keeping the body alive, keeping the death count low, so we can keep our war going on. So contractors make money, presidents get reelected. Ain't it great? And it just makes me sick.
Yeah, and of course, in the process of, as you say, trying to keep the body alive, they're literally drugging these men out of their minds, to the point as we see these suicide rates are horrific. So I think that they can only hold this together so long. And the people are ultimately not, as you say, going to stomach it forever. But it's a sad state that we've stomached it this long. So I think that part of the awareness, you said, we talked about this segment, feminizing the freedom or the liberty issue, talking about the real impact of war, not only, of course, from an economic David Stockman numbers kind of way, but from the real cost of the destruction of the family, of parents growing up, children growing up without both parents because of this. And that is the real cost that's not being discussed.
Go ahead, Robert. I'm sorry.
I was just saying that's the real cost that's not being discussed enough.
Yeah, you're right. And isn't it wonderful that the soldiers and the sailors and the airmen got it? That they gave more money to Ron Paul than all the other candidates combined, and the GOP, and way more than to Obama. And that they, of all people, understood that enough is enough.
Yes. Well, Doug, we got just a couple of minutes here left as we wrap up. I want to leave on as much a positive note as possible, considering the situation, the circumstances on many levels still look dire in terms of wanting to get the presidency, the executive branch, under the control of someone who is a constitutionalist. We are not giving up hope. We're not giving up our efforts. We're continuing, no matter what happens, to move this forward. That is for sure. However, as I said, when we open today, there are some things that are calling into question the inevitability of what's going to happen. I think there's still some semblance of we can't be 100% sure what's happening next.
Well, Ron Paul's an interesting guy. He's a real optimist. He's a kind man. He's a gentleman. And he's a realistic man. When they ask him, can you picture yourself being president? He made the point, I don't wake up every morning or go to bed every night dreaming about being president. He's not a selfishly ambitious person. He's someone who cares about the country.
Yes.
And he keeps pointing out over and over that, hey, this is going to happen anyway. It'll happen either because citizens awake and stop it in time, or it'll happen when it runs into a wall and we have to deal with reality, like Spain and Greece and other countries are dealing with. It's inevitable that this system is going to have to change.
Yes,
but it's just a tragedy to see an elite few people just rob the wealth of the rest of the nation. We used to at least have a house. The middle class could have the value of their house. Now we don't even have that. It's like the Middle Ages, where they finally gave the peasants a cow.
Wow.
And the dad would say, son, you don't know what it was like before we didn't have this cow. Thank God we have a cow. So they give us the internet and a big screen TV, and we have the illusion we're living. But it's an elite few people that are robbing this country of hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars in interest-free money to finance and refinance their dreams, while the poor and the middle class pay for it through devalued dollars and inflation. It's a tragedy. It's a scandal. And it's reaching such a proportion that the country's beginning to catch on.
Yeah, I saw very recently a news report that said in the last 3 years, American, if you could call it wealth or save, whatever it is, that however they assess your value in terms of money, dollars, had dropped by 40% in the last 3 years.
Yeah, that was the middle class. Yeah.
And Ron Paul, Congressman Dr. Paul, has been saying this for years, that they are robbing the middle class and the poor to pay for, as we said, like the foreign aid concept, stealing from the poor in America and giving it to the rich people overseas.
Yeah, and the poor, it's so funny. Poor people, a lot of poor people think, well, hey, I'm getting this money. I don't have to work. I don't have to. And you hear all this rhetoric about taxing the rich and not the poor. But as you know, the inflation taxes the poor. They may not think they're paying taxes, but they're getting diminished welfare dollars, diminished value. You see these movies where they'll make the right-wing president a real mean guy because he's going to cut the milk program or whatever.
Yes.
But it's no longer left and right. It's no longer up and down, the rich versus the poor. It's in and out. It's insiders who have gamed the system and who are making the money, and it's outsiders who aren't going to get a dime. They can't make money off their house. They can't make money in their own business, which is strangled by regulation and the loan process controlled by banks. They can't make money on the stock market because all the money's made before you get in the stock market anyway. The whole system has been gamed, slammed shut, and it's not left and right anymore. It's in and out, and we're out.
Well, Doug Wead, you're in right here at the Robert Scott Bell Show. You're welcome anytime. I appreciate your candor, your integrity, your passion for doing the right thing. And like I said, I enjoy talking to you, and I appreciate you discussing some of these things. We've got a lot left to do. It's not over. At the same time, we recognize that a lot of the decks are stacked, but at the same time, we can rearrange them. We can also let's say, reprogram much of what's happening, just as you've seen historically in your time witnessing these things firsthand. So we are in the midst of that change, and we don't often see it as it's happening, but it is happening.
It is happening, and that 80% that want to audit the Fed is a marvelous victory for this campaign. And Robert, thanks for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Doug Wead. Always a pleasure. We've got the links up to DougWead.com as well as his WordPress blog. Check it out at the blog notes today at RobertScottBell.com. Doug, we hope to hear from you again real soon.
And Facebook is where we're discussing all this. Doug Wead on Facebook. I try to get in there and answer every single point that's made or respond to it.
So after you hear the interview now, you can get on with Doug Wead on Facebook and pose a question. He'll be there. He's a good guy. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you much, Robert.
The Robert Scott Bell Show.